Folks, we'll get started in just a minute. If folks wouldn't mind taking a seat so we can go ahead and get started shortly. All right, good morning, everyone. Let me just turn this down. All right. It's great to see everyone. We have members here today from both the Education Committee and the Appropriations Committee for a bit of education on education funding here in the state of Connecticut. Before we kind of get into our program, I'll offer up a moment for chairs to offer up comment. Senator McCrory.
Well, again, good morning, everyone. I'm glad you guys come out to learn something that 99% of the people I think in this building and probably 95% of the people in the state really don't comprehend and understand how we fund our schools, which is called ECS. But today is going to be a learning experience for everyone. And I think we're going to all learn from this and move forward as a state. So again, thank you for coming out. Looking forward to being taught.
Thank you, sir. Representative Walker, I know you're on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everybody for this opportunity. I agree with Senator McCrory. Everybody thinks they know the formula, and then when they listen to it each time, it changes and they say, oh, I didn't know it anymore. So I think this is a great opportunity because education is critical for all our children, and we need to do better about how we do the funding. So thank you very much for pulling this together. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is Senator Austin on Zoom? I don't see her there. I think she may be joining us a little bit later. But yes, so today we're going to start off with folks from our nonpartisan office to kind of give us a sense of where we are currently with regards to education funding. And they'll be able to highlight kind of the 11 disjointed systems in which Connecticut currently uses to fund education, which is all a bit confusing for everybody. As my good co-chair says, everybody thinks they kind of understand this, but once you kind of delve into it, you're left with a whole lot more questions than you started with. So with that, we'll go ahead and introduce our folks from OLR and OFA. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Education and Appropriation Committee chairs, ranking members, and committee members to Education Funding 101, the ECS grant and choice school programs. I'm just going to ask if Rosalie can share her screen with Janelle so we can have the presentation pop up.
And also, folks, I'm sure you'll have questions as they go through this. We're going to save questions until the end of their presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So my name is John Moran. I'm a principal analyst with the Office of Legislative Research. And with me are Mary Beth Sullivan, senior attorney with OLR, Dan Dilworth to my right, principal analyst with OFA, and Janelle Stevens, chief budget analyst also with OFA. Mary Beth, Dan, and I will be doing the presentation, and Janelle's going to be our lifeline. We're going to present details, hopefully not too many details, about the ECS grant formula and 5 types of choice school programs: technical high schools, charter schools, magnet schools, agri-science and technology centers, which are commonly known as BOAG centers, and the open choice program. As Chairman Curry mentioned, we were hoping we could save questions till the end of our presentation. And also, just for purposes of the presentation today, we're hoping to not get too stuck on town-specific questions, because sometimes that can lead us down a path of a unique situation that may not reflect the broad situation that most towns are in. So the next, okay, the slide's up there. This is our overview for today. So part 1, education cost sharing grant. We're going to have a quick legal history, the formula overview, and the full funding phase in, which is currently in law now. And then part 2, choice school funding, a little bit about the history and intentions of those programs, school choice options and their funding mechanisms. And then part 3 is the big picture state costs for all of these programs and the per program state education funding percentage. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Dilworth of OFA for the education cost sharing grant portion.
Thanks, John. Good morning. Like John said, my name is Dan Dilworth, and I'm from the Office of Fiscal Analysis. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the Education Cost Sharing Grant, also known as ECS. The first thing to know about ECS is that it's a lot of money. The fiscal year 23 appropriation is $2.179 billion. That is the largest source of state aid to municipalities. It's approximately 40% of total appropriated aid to municipalities in fiscal year 23. And not only that, it's also one of the largest single general fund line items in the entire general fund. So it's a very significant amount of money. So, so how did we come to have the education cost sharing grant? Well, in 1974, there was a Superior Court case called Horton v. Meskill that ruled that the system of public school finance in Connecticut was inherently unfair due to variances in local property tax bases across the state. And the court ordered the state to construct a formula to address those variances. So the state's first attempt to address those was called the Guaranteed Tax Base, which was created in 1975. And that distributed aid to towns based on wealth and need and a few other variables. About 10 years later, in 1974, the courts came back and said that the education finance system is still retaining significant inequalities and ordered the state to take another series of measures to overhaul the education system again. And from that was born the Education Cost Sharing Grant in 1988. And it was first implemented in fiscal year 90, the fiscal year 90 budget. So it's been around for about 33 years now. The ECS grant consists of 3 primary components. Those components are the weighted student count multiplied by the foundation amount multiplied by the state aid percentage. And that gives you the full funding amount under ECS for each town. There are some additional components that we'll get into as well. So the first thing is the weighted student count. Weighted student count is the total number of students enrolled in a district as of October 1st of each year. And that number is added, so it's that number plus 30% of the number of low-income students in a municipality. Low income is defined as eligibility for free and reduced price lunch. And then it's that plus 25% of the number of English language learners in a district, plus 15% for what's called the low income concentration. And low income concentration means the extent to which more than 60% of the students in a district are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. So districts get one bump for students that qualify for free and reduced price lunch, and then essentially a second bump for if more than 60% of the students in a district are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. The second component is the foundation amount, and this is relatively easy to explain. It's $11,525 per student, and that is the same in every district, and that is it was set in fiscal year 14 and has not changed since. It represents the estimated cost of educating a student who is not low income or an English learner. So the third component is the state aid percentage. And the state aid percentage is the state's share of education costs according to the formula. And it is determined by 2 primary factors. The first is property wealth and the second is income wealth. The 70% property wealth and 30% income wealth on the slides, what that means is essentially that property wealth counts more for the weighting for the state aid percentage than income wealth does. So property wealth is defined as a comparison of a town's property wealth to the median property wealth in the state, the median town's property wealth. And when we say property wealth, we mean equalized net grand list per capita, or ENGL-PC. And it's ENGL-PC is an estimate of the market value of taxable property in a municipality. And we have average up there because it's the average ENGL-PC over 3 fiscal years. So we look at 3 fiscal years and take the average, and that's the ENGL-PC that we use. So it's the estimate of the market value of taxable property in a municipality. So the higher the estimated market value in your town, the higher your tax base theoretically, which means the lower your state aid percentage. And then similarly, income wealth is a comparison of a town's income wealth to the median income wealth, median town's income wealth in the state. And that's defined by median household income. So again, the higher your median household income, the greater your ability to raise funds for education through local property taxes. And conversely, the lower your state aid percentage would be. So I wanted to kind of walk you through some of the variation in the state aid percentage wealth factors and how that translates to variation in the state aid percentage. So you can see here, property wealth as defined by average ENGLPC ranges from 788,000 per capita in the wealthiest property wealth town in the state, down to 57,500 roughly in the poorest property wealth town in the state. So the 788,000 is 14 times greater than the 57,000. So the wealthiest town is 14 times wealthier than the poorest property town in Connecticut. Income wealth, there's a little bit less, but still significant amount of variation. The town with the highest median income is 230,000, which is about 6 times higher than the town with the lowest median income at about 36,000. And so correspondingly, that results in a pretty significant variation in state aid percentage. The highest is 75.4% and the lowest is 1%. Actually, there's actually several towns that get 1% state aid percentage, and we'll get to that in a second. So I mentioned a few additional components to the ECS formula. So after all that is calculated, there are minimum required state aid percentages for alliance districts and priority school districts of 10%. And there is a minimum state aid percentage of 1% for all other districts. So this applies to a lot of those very wealthy communities that we were talking about. If it wasn't for that 1% floor, a lot of those communities would actually receive no ECS funding. And the next adjustment is a percentage point increase for low wealth communities as defined by public investment community measure. And then the last component is a regional school district and endowed academy bonus. So if you send your students to a regional district or an endowed academy, you get a bonus of $100 times the number of students you send times the number of grades that they are enrolled in. So I wanted to walk you through, now that we've gone through the formula, how everything is calculated. So here we have 2 fake towns, Town A and Town B. They have identical student demographics. They have 1,000 students. They have 100 low-income students. So that's multiplied by 30%. That gives you a low-income student weight of 30. They have 20 English language learners. So that gives you, multiplied by 25%, gives you an English language learner weight of 5. Neither town meets the threshold for low-income concentration weight. So they each have a weighted student count of 1,035. So town A, that 1,035 is multiplied by the foundation, 11,525. And that's multiplied by town A's state aid percentage of 44%. And that gives you a total ECS grant for town A of $5.2 million. Now, town B is actually a little bit poorer than town A. So their state aid percentage is 62%. So their weighted student count of 1,035 is multiplied by their foundation amount multiplied by 62%. That gives you a grant for town B of about $7.4 million. So you can see how differences in property wealth, in particular across demographically similar communities, can result in significant changes in ECS funding. The next slide that we wanted to go through is, we just wanted to show you kind of a calculation of fiscal year 23 ECS grants per pupil. This is a calculation that we did of each town's fiscal year 23 entitlement divided by the number of students in each town. So what this is saying is that the town, the highest per pupil ECS grant in fiscal year 23 was $11,444. And the lowest per pupil ECS grant is $68 per person. So that's that per student. So that's quite the range. The median per pupil ECS grant is $3,375. So what this is saying is that 84 towns in Connecticut receive a per pupil ECS grant of higher than $3,375, all the way up to $11,444. And that another 84 towns in Connecticut receive a per pupil ECS grant of less than $3,375, all the way down to $68 per capita. So now we'll talk a little bit about the phase-in. So historically, ECS has not been fully funded due to various adjustments that have been made over the years and various provisions. There are a lot of towns that are getting more than what the formula would call for them to get, and a lot of other towns that are getting significantly less than what the formula would call for them to get. So PA 17-4 attempted to solve this problem by implementing a 10-year phase-in for both overfunded and underfunded towns. In fiscal year 24, under current law, 81 towns are underfunded and 88 towns are overfunded, including 11 alliance districts that are currently being held harmless. So kind of showing sort of where we've been with the phase-in. You can see the phase-in started in fiscal year 19 with an increase in the ECS entitlement of $88.7 million. And then since then, it's been about a 1 to 2% increase in the entitlement per year as the phase-in has continued. And then the next slide shows sort of kind of where we think we're going from here. This is based on, again, these are estimates based on fiscal year 23 calculations. So these numbers do change, in other words. And so what this is showing is the current fiscal year. Like I said, overfunded towns are being held harmless. So there is no decrease for overfunded towns. There's an increase of $39.4 million for underfunded towns in fiscal year 23. Going forward, underfunded towns will continue to have increases of about $40 million a year until fiscal year 28, at which point they will be fully funded. And overfunded towns beginning next year will have increases of about $7.6 million. Decreases of about $7.6 million per year until fiscal year 30, at which point those communities will be properly funded. And I think that is it for me. I think now I'll turn it back over to John.
And before you do so, I know a number of members have text or emailed asking if this presentation will be shared. So I'm sure you can share that with Rosalie and she'll get that out to everyone.
Yes, certainly. Okay, now Mary Beth is going to lead us off about our school choice program. We're going to start going through those programs.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mary Beth Sullivan from the Office of Legislative Research. Now that your ECS overview is complete, we'd like to help you get familiar with the different choice school options in our state. Our goal is to help you understand when and why the legislature created these options, the state costs associated with these options, different policy and funding tensions created by these options. Our state has had a wide range of Sorry, Janelle, could you go back one slide? Thank you. Our state has had a wide range of public school options known as choice schools. They provide families with some alternatives to their neighborhood public school. We're going to take a look at 5 types of choice schools or programs and briefly describe each one's curriculum, general operation organization, and responsibility for special education and transportation services. As you can see, we've had over 100 years of school choice in Connecticut, and each type of school has its own legislative history. We've had a statewide technical high school system since 1917. Since 1955, we've had a statewide vocational agriculture program. And then, as you can see, in the 90s, we saw a rapid expansion of choice program options with interdistrict magnet schools in 1993, charter schools in 1996, and the open choice program in 1997. And this is in part because of the landmark Connecticut Supreme Court ruling Sheff versus O'Neill. In 1996, the court ruled that the racial, economic, and ethnic isolation in the Hartford School District and those of its surrounding towns violated Connecticut's constitution, and the court ordered the state to remedy that violation. So in response to the Sheff ruling, the General Assembly established an interdistrict school choice program, expanded the number of and funding for interdistrict magnet schools and cooperative programs, and expanded the number of and state support for charter schools. Once each of these programs was established, it became a part of the Connecticut education landscape, and it also develops, for each of these programs, develop their own constituencies of students, parents, teachers, and administrators who come to depend on and often advocate for their respective programs.
Thank you. And so on our next slide, we want to show how these school choice programs have led to some tensions that's the word we chose to identify some of this consternation you could use for some of these programs. So our first item here is, here's a competition for students. Each type of choice program needs to attract students, and these students would otherwise be going to their regular home district school. And on top of that, in the past 10 years or so, the state as a whole has seen its overall state student population decrease each year by a little bit. So that also sort of heightens the competition for students. Now, number 2 on our slide here, there can be a competition for funds. Some choice programs mean that the local school district or the town does not get the ECS grant that it would otherwise get for that student had they remained in the home district. Then at the state level, especially in the years when the budget is tight, the choice programs also compete for funds in the state budget process. So now on our next slide, there's a few more tensions. Number 3, participation in some, but not all choice programs means the sending district must pay tuition to the receiving district. Furthermore, the home district usually has a responsibility of paying special education costs for a student in a choice program when the costs exceed the typical cost of educating the student. Similarly, with transportation, the responsibility often falls to the sending district. And the last one we like to point out, number 4, there's a demand for seats in these programs that often outpaces the number of available seats. And having long waiting lists can lead to frustration or to disillusionment with these programs. Now we're going to talk about each of the choice programs in just a little bit more detail, one at a time.
The first type of choice school we'll examine is the technical high school. Connecticut has 17 high schools as part of CTEX, the Connecticut Technical Education and Career System. CTEX offers a curriculum with academic and technology instruction, gives students opportunities to explore careers in manufacturing, IT, culinary arts, audiovisual, etc. The CTEX are organized as state-run regional high schools, and each of the high schools serves multiple districts. Recently, CTEX was spun off from the State Department of Education into its own independent state agency. For special education, CTEX is responsible for both implementing a student's individualized education program, which is their special ed services plan, and also CTEX covers the cost of special education and related services that the student receives. And finally, for transportation, the sending district, the school district where the student resides, must provide transportation to the high school, even if it is located outside of the sending district. Now we're going to take a look at how CTEX schools are funded. CTEX high schools are completely funded through state appropriations. The school, the CTEX school, receives no local contributions or tuition. Also, the local sending districts do not receive a per pupil ECS grant from the state for the students who attend CTEX. To help with transportation costs, sending districts are eligible for partial reimbursement from the state, and special education costs are covered by CTEX, as we discussed, not the sending district. The second type of choice school we'll examine is the charter school. Charter schools offer a traditional curriculum that is similar to neighborhood public schools, and many of them have a college preparatory theme or focus. They are organized under the leadership of a school governing council or charter management organization made up of private citizens. State charters are independent of local districts, and we do have one local charter school in Connecticut that is part of a local district. So the majority of our schools are state charters. For special education, the charter school implements the student's IEP, but the sending district covers the amount of the cost to implement it that is exceeding the reasonable cost of educating a student, minus any state grants or federal grants that the charter school might already be receiving. And finally, for transportation, the sending district provides transportation if the charter school is located within the district. Out of district transportation is optional. State charter schools are funded in part by the state through a weighted per pupil operating grant that is similar in structure to the ECS grant. The grant's formula uses a fixed per student foundation amount. It's same as the ECS grant foundation, and also uses the charter school's enrolled student count weighted according to their students' needs, specifically their free and reduced price lunch eligibility and English learner status. Charter schools also receive donations from private donors, including foundations, through their charter management organizations or governing boards. The sending town pays no tuition to state charter schools, but it loses ECS dollars for the students sent to charter schools because they are not part of the sending town's ECS count. Next, John will discuss the remaining three types of choice programs.
Thank you. So next we have magnet schools. So magnet schools are assisting the state in racial and ethnic desegregation. The schools are designed to create racially diverse student bodies and reduce racial isolation. They typically have a themed curriculum to help draw students from other school districts, with some examples are performing arts or STEM or IT and software engineering and international studies, to name a few. They're operated either by a local school district, a regional education service center, also known as a RESC, you hear that term thrown around, or other nonprofit entities such as Goodwin University. For special education, the sending district is responsible for any cost above the reasonable cost of educating the student, minus any state or federal grant. The magnet school, as the school where the child is actually attending, must implement the student's IEP or individual education program. Regarding transportation, for students from the sending districts, the transportation is usually provided by a RESC. So now we're going to go to the magnet school funding slide. So this is another one of our circle of money for these schools. The graphic is meant to show how the money flows related to the magnet school. So starting at the top, the state sends the ECS grant to the town for each resident student in the town. When the student leaves the sending district for a magnet, in most cases, the sending town must pay tuition to the magnet school operator. See the arrow from the town to the magnet. As you can see, the tuition ranges from $2,000 to $7,021 per student, depending on the type of magnet school. It must be noted that some magnets, including all host magnets run by districts in the Chef region, are not permitted to charge tuition. So next we have the separate arrow that goes from the state to the magnet schools. This is the state per student grant to the magnet. Here we're focusing on the grants for the out of district students, which range from $7,227 to to $13,315 per student. Some magnets also receive a grant for their in-district students. So here we see that some districts, in the big picture, some districts may get more ECS than the tuition costs for their students that go to magnets, but other districts pay more in tuition than they get in ECS. Our next one is agri-science and technology centers. These centers are formally called in statute Regional Agricultural Science and Technology Education Centers. It's a mouthful. Their curriculum is a VOAG curriculum in addition to the traditional high school curriculum offered by the host school. The organization, most centers are embedded within existing high schools, and the local district's Board of Education operates the VOAG program. For special ed, the sending district covers any cost above the average cost to educate a student, and the VOAG school must implement the student's IEP. Transportation, the sending district is responsible for reasonable transportation costs. So now we go to the funding slide for this one. And the VOAG circle of money is similar to that of the magnet schools, but there's less variability in the grant amounts for the arrows. So once again, the state sends the ECS grant to the town, then the sending district must pay the VOAG center tuition of $6,823 for each student it sends to the VOAG center. In addition, the VOAG center receives $5,200 per student grant for each VOAG student in the program. So as with magnet schools, for some sending districts, they could receive more in their ECS grant per student than they pay in tuition, but for most towns in the state, the tuition payment for VOAG exceeds their ECS student grant. Okay, now we have one more choice program, Open Choice. This is our last choice program. This is a voluntary intra-district attendance program. The curriculum is the traditional school curriculum that's offered at the receiving districts. The organization is implemented voluntarily by participating districts in the Bridgeport, Hartford, and New Haven regions, and it's overseen by the state. In this program, you can have a student from an urban district going to a suburban school district, or you could have a student from a suburban district going to an urban district. For special education, the sending district is responsible for the cost above the reasonable cost of educating the student, minus any per student grant, state or federal grant to the receiving districts. And once again, as we saw in the other ones, the receiving district must implement the IEP. And for transportation, the RESCs provide transportation. So now we go to the funding slide. And for Open Choice, the participating student counts as about half a student for purposes of the ECS student count for the sending town. And it counts as half for the receiving town. In this way, Open Choice is different from the other programs. But the sending district does not have to send tuition to the receiving district. The state sends a receiving district a per student Open Choice grant, which ranges from $3,000 to $10,000. The amount of the grant, which is set in statute, increases in increments if the receiving district takes a higher number of Open Choice students. For example, a district receives a $3,000 per student grant if the Open Choice students are less than 2% of that district's student population. The grant amount increases incrementally until at the highest amount, the district receives $8,000 per student if Open Choice students are at least 4% of that district student population. Then on top of that, last year, the budget implementer, PA 22-118, added an additional $2,000 per student to this grant, but this only applies to the Open Choice students in the Chef region. And that additional $2,000, that's how we got our total range of $3,000 to $10,000. Okay, that finishes our description of the various choice programs. And now Dan's going to tell us just some big picture state costs for all these programs.
Just two more slides, don't worry. So We wanted to quickly show you a high-level funding summary of both ECS and the choice programs combined. So as you can see here, there's quite a bit of variation in funding levels for the different grants. ECS, as we've discussed before, is one of the largest expenditures in the entire general fund. And then that varies down to the VOAG program, which is about $18.8 million. And then the magnet schools and open choice are kind of in the middle, about 395 million, and then the CTEX at $170 million, and charter schools at 134.5 million in fiscal year 23. And you can always also see the orange rectangle at the bottom kind of shows that each of the grants has seen some growth in the last 5 years, varying from 8% for the ECS grant as the phase-in has occurred, up to 36% for the VOAG programs. So the last slide, we just want to show you kind of for one fiscal year how the sort of share of all this funding. So you can see that, you know, ECS is about 3/4 of all the funding, and the remaining quarter is split up between magnet schools, open choice, CTEX, charter schools, and the VOAG centers. So that translates for numbers, that translates into about the 2.178 billion for ECS, and for the choice programs, it's about 719 million in fiscal year 23 appropriations. And that concludes our presentation. If there are any questions.
Kind of laughing up here, Jen looked over and just asked, how did we get here? And I think that, you know, it's funny when a whole lot of education probably leaves people a little bit more confused than they were when they walked in the room on the way in which we fund our current public education system. A quick question with regards to all the different kind of choice, the VOAGs, the open choice, those are based on what in particular? Are they just arbitrary? Are they simply?
They're just for, sorry.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, they're just flat per pupil amount.
Okay. And so is our ECS formula the only one that takes student need into account currently?
Not quite. ECS is the only one that uses it as extensively. The charter school formula is getting phased in, although there's nothing in statute for 24 and beyond, but the charter school methodology is a little more complicated, that it starts with the ECS foundation amount of 11,525. And then they're also getting per student a percent of the difference between that amount, the 11,525, and their full funding amount using the ECS student weights. So it's partially weighted, partially based on student weights, but mostly the ECS foundation at this point.
And that foundation amount is, you know, while we claim that it is the cost to educate a child without any additional needs, that is kind of an arbitrary figure that we use and have used.
Indeed.
Okay. Senator?
I've been in education for 33 years in education as an educator, and this is probably the best explanation of how we fund ECS that I've ever seen. So I appreciate the work you guys did. Great job. You broke it down very well. Just a simple question, not even necessarily a question. You said in 1997, open choice started, but that program been around since 1966. It was called something else. And I'm wondering, you know, is the reason why we have it here documented that it was started in 1997 is because of the chef case? Because the program has been here since 66. And my answer may be, is it because it wasn't a state sanctioned program? It was an agreement between communities. Do you know anything about that?
Senator, I don't think I know the answer to that, but I follow what you're saying in terms of the logic that maybe the state got into the game about adding a grant in 97. I mean, we looked at the law and that's when that law was passed in 97. So there could have been something. It's actually similar to the the way back history on the technical high schools. There was a couple here or there before there was a state system. So that happens sometimes.
Yeah, I think as you answered that question, I think I just kind of answered myself. That program was a volunteer program, so there was no state dollars involved. It was a volunteer program between communities. It didn't get financed until '97 because of Chef. So you helped me answer my own question. Thank you. I'm good. I'll come back later if something else pops up.
All right, we'll go to Chairwoman Walker on Zoom.
Thank you. And I also want to say that's the best explanation I've ever seen for how the state of Connecticut funds their education program. I just have one, I know, as if we didn't get enough information in there. There's one other detail that I would like to ask if you could provide us later, is the size of the population or the universe for each one of those districts over the 5 years, so that we see where has the growth gone, where have the students, the populations either gone up or gone down, so that we can look at that a little bit, so that we make sure we're looking at what are the choices and what are the people of Connecticut looking as far as where they want their kids to go to school. So I would appreciate that information. Thank you.
I'll just say big picture, it's not a huge amount, like 500,000 kids are in public school in Connecticut, and these other programs are roughly, added all together, they're less than 20%. So I don't have the exact number, but we can definitely get there.
We
Thank
have the
you.
first of this year, but we don't have the 5-year look back that you're looking for, so we can get that to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just quick, so, Representative Walker, that was a great question, because this is very important, because we have to look at where our parents are choosing to educate their children, where they're moving to, and what options they're looking for. So I think that's very important to know. And I would love to look at that 5-year look back, because what we do know is our population overall is declining, right? Our student population is declining, but if options are opening up and our parents are choosing those options, that's very important information to know, because that's where resources to be placed. Thank you.
Sure, we can tell you right now the recent figures on the enrollment. So for magnet schools, it's just over 40,000 approximately. For charter schools, it's not quite 11,000. For VOAG, it's about 3,600. For CTEX, 11,200, and open choice, approximately 3,000 students. So that's your current universe. But again, we'll get the historical information to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and while we have a number of choice opportunities that parents are selecting from, I think when you talked about the consternation and the tensions and the competition, we shouldn't be competing against one another with all of our public schools. These are all of our kids, and this is what we are supposed to be doing as legislators, is providing the resources and the funding necessary to ensure that all our public schools are funded in a manner that is equitable to ensure success moving forward. Hands up, I see Representative Dathan. Rep. Dathan online.
Button wasn't working. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Just wanted to ask a little bit about alliance funding, how it works, and other sort of funding for other programs like that, as well as English as a second language.
Sure, we can talk about Alliance District funding. Alliance District funding is a portion of a town's ECS grant for the 36 Alliance districts. There used to be 33, and now there are 36 starting this year. So the amount of your ECS grant that's an Alliance District portion is simply the change in your ECS grant for this year minus since fiscal year 12. So you're subtracting fiscal year 12's grant from this year's grant. So that's for the towns that aren't new. For the new towns, the 3 new towns in the Alliance District program, it's going to be the change in their grant from when they started being an Alliance District. So it's a much smaller amount. The amount of the Alliance District grant varies tremendously because some of the Alliance Districts have had a lot of growth in their ECS grants and others haven't. So the Alliance District set aside from the ECS funds is not one set amount. It's not based on per pupil. It's just based on the change in your ECS grant from fiscal year 12 for almost every town.
Got it. Thank you very much. That helps.
Next up, Representative Dillon.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this presentation. I have a lot of questions and I don't think we can take up the time with them, but I just want to ask if you could provide some resources, maybe offline, and that would be more detailed explanation and sites for what you would consider to be a magnet school, because we did have magnets created pursuant to Chef that had I think a special approach of about 5 million at that time, but there were some that existed prior to that. And I'm not sure, I don't know whether there's such a thing as locally designated magnets, federal magnets, and state magnets. And I don't want to, and some of those are tied to school construction. So if you could direct us or provide us with a resource that would spell out the definitions of magnets and the implications, that would be very helpful.
We could look into that for you, Representative. I mean, we don't have any federal magnet schools. We do have obviously the state designated ones that are approved through SDE. That's the primary one, but we can look into that more for you and see if there are any other types of vehicles that we might not have captured in this presentation today. Does that make sense?
Yes, and as I said, I don't want to divert everyone. You've provided a very rich amount of information here, but I do want to follow up with that offline. And the second, well, there's a lot.
You got one more, Dylan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On the school lunch component of the bump, this may be obvious, but is it very specifically or statutorily right now pegged to the federal schedule, which would be more than 40% of the students are below poverty level? Would that be accurate?
No, you get your free and reduced price lunch students counted no matter how many of them you have or what share of the district enrollment it is. So if you have 2 students, then you get that 30% for those 2 students.
Could you provide us with that, with the site for that? That's really helpful to know. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. We have one more online, then we'll come to the room. If you do have a question in the room, Representative Leeper is keeping a running list, so feel free to throw your hand up so she sees you. Representative Nuccio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you guys for this presentation. I've spent a lot of time trying to dig into how ECS works and how it's funded, and this was a really good breakdown, really easy to follow breakdown. So I want to talk a little bit about the base funding on here. As Representative Curry said, I think it's a shame that we have to be in an environment where we are competing against each other instead of thinking about what is the best option for our kids to learn. And I have the very unfortunate prize winning number here where one of my towns loses the most amount of ECS credit every year. It's $330,000 that our town loses every year. And it gets me back to the base formula there. You know, I truly believe it's the state of Connecticut's constitutional obligation to provide a free and public education for every child. And I think we need to just develop a minimum amount that we say the state should be paying for these children. And that's the base amount, period. Nobody is ever going to get less than that minimum amount. And then we can account for all of the things that make education harder in certain areas than others, including the complexities of the socioeconomic environment and the diversity of that area. And instead of taking away from one town to give another, which puts us in direct battle with each other all the time, just having the state of Connecticut do what it's supposed to do, and that's fund education for a free and public education for all children. We talk about this ECS formula, and I look at my town, which is a moderate middle class town. It's a middle class town, and our mill rate is in the top, one of the top percents of the state. Also, our cost per educating a child is one of the lowest in the state. at around $16,000 a year to educate a child. But every year we have to raise our taxes by $330,000 to account for the ECS that's being lost, which makes my town a town that is frankly too expensive to live in for a lot of people. It does not promote diversity. It does not promote having people of varying incomes live there. If you can't afford to pay $9,000 taxes on your home, you can't live in my town. And that, I think, is a problem that we have to layer into ECS here. If we want education to be fair and equitable across the board, we have to have it so people can afford to live in these towns where they want their kids to go to school. And the ECS formula as it is right now is a good start, but I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to account for diversity of transportation or the smaller rural towns, and whether or not we believe the state has to pay a base amount, period. Before we start looking at cutting people, we need to be looking at how we can add people. So I just wanted to get that out there because I think it's something that gets overlooked a lot. I'm interested in the numbers that you had on there saying that 80-something% of towns were going to be at the median of 3,000. I know when the ECS is done, the town of Tallinn will be receiving maybe $2,000 a year per student to educate their kids. And I would argue that that's an unrealistic amount for the state to be helping to fund if you ever want my town to have more opportunities for other socioeconomic classes. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do on this. And I'm looking forward to hopefully working collaboratively and actually doing that work.
Well, have we got a bill for you, Rep. Nuccio?
I'm a little curious on that bill because I don't think it helps. I'm very open-minded, Rep. Curry, I really am. And I'm going into it open-minded, but I don't know that it's really going to help two of my towns. Now, it used to be all three of my towns, which, by the way, one of my towns had about 40% of the kids who got free and reduced lunch, and they were still losing $60,000 a year in ECS. So that to me says the formula's got some tweaking that needs to happen, but I'm very anxious to learn about 5003, and I look forward to those conversations.
Sounds good. We appreciate the comments. Representative Leeper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for this presentation. It was so thorough and clear in what is otherwise extremely opaque formula. I was wondering, for the state aid percent maximum of 74%, is that in statute? Where does that 74% come from?
That's just the result that you get when you take into account the property wealth and the median household income. There's no cap on the state aid percentage. There's nothing limiting it at the high end. You can't get less than 1% for anybody. You can't get less than 10% if you're an Alliance District or Priority School District, but there's no cap on the upper end. So obviously, if you have a state aid percentage of 75%, your town is both property poor and income poor.
So I guess that brings me to the way in which the state aid percentage interacts with the weighted student count and the overall calculation of how much a district should get. What is the mechanism through which are the towns ranked sort of in term along the median? You're shaking your head no.
Yeah.
So it's not like school construction.
The math is really complicated. I'm not going to lie. The math is really complicated for that part. But essentially, like we had in the slide, it's the weights are 70% for property wealth, because that's how you're getting your money, right? You're getting it from property taxes at the local level. And then it's 30% for income, with the argument being that if you have a low income level, it doesn't matter how much you have in property if you can't afford to pay your property taxes.
Yeah.
So there are components of both, and then it's a complicated calculation that is done.
I won't bore everyone in this room, but maybe if you could share that offline, I think that would be really helpful just for my own understanding.
I should have also said, it's not just your town's value, it's how your town's value compares to the median. Yeah. So if you are far from the median, it has a bigger difference, right? So we have an ECS infographic online. We didn't put it up here, but it does show the calculation more thoroughly than we did in our presentation. We're happy to send that to you, or I can show it to you in a different way if you'd like.
Thank you so much. Can I just ask one thing? Is the foundational amount supposed to be the total per pupil expenditure that the state believes is the right in quotes amount? Or is it the amount that the state in theory is supposed to be providing the district for each child? Because I think that's part of a a gray area for people's understanding on how much their communities receive?
So the foundation amount was set in statute and it's changed over time, right? And I kind of want to back up a little and say, when the ECS phase-in was started, before that, like frequently the numbers were printed, right? It wasn't that we were following a formula. We had a formula in statute, but we were kind of ignoring it. So the numbers were printed and now we started phasing it in. As far as the actual foundation amount, you know, I wasn't there, so I can't speak to exactly how it was set, but it was a product of budget negotiations, I'm sure, right? It's part of the budget implementer almost always. So it hasn't changed in a long time. In general, the explanation is the first one you offered. You know, it's the theoretical cost, but there's not really research been done, or we haven't had a task force in a long time that's re-examined the foundation amount. It's not something that anybody would actually expect because the per pupil expenditures, the NSEP in Connecticut is just over $20,000. So it's not actually reflective of, you know, real costs of educating real students necessarily, but that's what's in statute. So that's what the foundation amount is.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's a very nonpartisan answer. All right, we have Representative Cooley, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question. Thank you very much for the presentation. Would it be possible to get a geographic spread distribution of the technical schools, the VOAG schools, the charter schools, and the magnet schools to see where they're located and what communities they're serving throughout the state?
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
All right, Representative Rader.
Thank you. I had a question around transportation. I know just anecdotally in my district, I serve on the Board of Ed, and our transportation costs for some of our magnet transportation has more than doubled because they unilaterally decided to change start times for about 18 schools. And so my question is, in taking notes, it seems like for the most part, the sending district responsibility is fully to fund the transportation, inclusive, I'm imagining, of a special ed student that might need their own small bus or special transportation. And it just feels like this switch to a start time, and I'm still doing some homework on why that happened, was this kind of unanticipated cost being extended to the sending districts without really much input or understanding. But I'm curious to understand now with the increased cost to fuel, diesel has more than doubled. I know in our district, driver shortages, all of this is impacting sending districts. And if there's any opportunity to evaluate, looking back historically to see how much transportation costs have increased for sending districts, it would just be helpful to understand that. And also how this start time change will also be impacting sending districts, because it's a small piece, but I know for some small districts, it can be a very large unanticipated expense. I'm just curious. And also if you have any input. That'd be great.
We can look into that more. There is a substantial amount of state funding that does assist with magnet school transportation. It's about $65 million, magnet school and open choice transportation. So the state is chipping in, but it doesn't necessarily cover, the bulk or however much of the cost. John, you want to go?
I was just going to add the start time, that is a local decision. So that may have triggered some additional costs, but that's a decision made at the local level.
No, this wasn't the sending district changing their start time. This is the VOAG schools changing their start time, and about 18 other of these,
Okay, but even the VOAG schools, they're run by that host district, which is a local district.
But it's not our district, for
Right,
example.
but I'm just saying it's a local decision. Like the state doesn't
Right.
get into that. It could cause, like you're saying, could cause some additional transportation costs. But if the local VOAG school change their start time, the state is not normally involved in that. But as you're saying, it could have triggered some additional education costs.
Yeah, I believe there are about 18 schools that changed their start times. But again, I'm looking into that for next year. And so districts are now going to have to budget for that.
Can we follow up with you?
Thank you.
after
I
the meeting?
appreciate
Great,
that.
thank you.
Representative Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for your presentation. As a newbie, that was incredibly thorough, and I think I sort of understand some of it now, so I appreciate that. I'm particularly interested in the property wealth calculation. When you say that it's the 70% is based on the property wealth, what is included in the definition of the property that's being evaluated? Is it a straight grand list calculation? Or do we have things like open space and historic and town properties included in that property that is being included? Are we talking about everything in the grand list, including cars?
So I can answer that for you.
Thank you.
So every year, municipalities have to assess all, real property in their town. And the net grand list is the portion of that assessment that is taxable. So that doesn't include state property, churches, doesn't include open space land, as you mentioned. It's only taxable real and commercial industrial property.
So the net grand list is what you're using for the property wealth definition?
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's net grand list per capita, and then it's averaged over 3 years to sort of smooth it out. So if you have a big jump or a big drop, then the effect won't be so strong in the first year.
Thank you.
All right, we've got 4 more folks up, and so we can hopefully get back
Okay,
on schedule with our next panel
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, may I ask one quick follow-up question?
really quickly.
Really quick. So if assessments go up this year, regardless of what the town does with its mill rate, the grand list goes up, and therefore the property wealth goes up, and therefore the ultimate amount a town will receive in ECS will go down, correct?
Sort of, yes, but the data lags a little bit, so it wouldn't necessarily be felt next year.
All right, Senator Summers, nice to see you.
Yes, thank you for being here. Thank you for that presentation. It was really well done. I do have a question on alliance districts because I have a breakdown in front of me that I've worked on with 36 alliance districts. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the disparity in the funding for alliance districts, because there are some alliance districts at the top getting about $2,200 per pupil. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have some that are only getting $149 per person. Now,
Yes.
There are 2 that I picked out in particular that are the same demographic. They have the same poverty rate, the same population. They're located, one's in Eastern Connecticut and one is in Central Connecticut. But the disparity is staggering. One is getting $970 per pupil and the other is getting 0. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the disparity. If you had perhaps a school that was underfunded to begin with in 2012, and now it's an alliance district, but getting no additional dollars to help get out of the alliance district. Can you speak to that? I have the whole breakdown. I can share it with you at a later time, but it doesn't seem that the alliance districts are funded properly or fairly.
Yes, I'd be happy to speak to that. As I mentioned earlier, what an alliance district gets for the alliance district portion of the ECS grant is dependent on how the town's grant has changed. So if your town hasn't really changed for your ECS grant, then you're not really going to get any alliance district money, or perhaps 0, right? I think you're probably talking about Groton, and Groton actually would have
I'm not talking about Groton, but that's okay.
Okay. So there were some changes with the alliance districts. So you're correct. It doesn't necessarily mean that the alliance district portion is based on your student population. It's just based on the change in the ECS grant for almost all of them since fiscal year 12. So if your town hasn't changed, you're not getting an alliance district portion. And that was just a function of how it was created for fiscal year 12. That has remained the same.
Right. So the newer alliance districts are getting no additional funding, and the other ones.
So
we can talk offline, but I have a real problem with the way they're funded. It's not fair or equitable at all, especially when you cross the Connecticut River into Eastern Connecticut. You can look at it. The other thing, just quickly on alliance districts, I wanted to follow up. I know that they were designated by a cap, by how many students, but I think that this committee should look at the elementary school level and some of our smaller towns that are struggling and try to look at an alliance type of program for them, because I think early education is the most important. And if we are not funding that appropriately, by the time they get to a larger school and a larger population, it could be almost too late. So the alliance districts are based on a larger population, and our rural and smaller towns are kind of left out of that conversation. Thank you.
So for the alliance district qualifications, it's simply that originally it was the 33 lowest scoring districts. And then it was expanded in the last budget legislation last spring to say, okay, it's the 33 lowest now. And then also we're grandfathering in the 3 that would have no longer have been alliance districts. And then when you become an alliance district, you're not necessarily getting more funding, right? Alliance district money is just a portion of your ECS grant. So for those 3 that were new to the alliance district program in fiscal year 23, then you're getting your increase over fiscal year 22. So is your alliance district portion of your ECS grant. It doesn't necessarily mean you're getting more money. It just means you're getting an alliance district portion of your ECS grant, which may be 0 if you had no change in your ECS grant. I'm not here to defend it. I don't necessarily think it's the correct policy choice, as my own personal opinion. I'm just explaining it.
And Janelle, if you wouldn't mind just putting that in writing and so we can send that out to members so there's better understanding of the Alliance District and that there is not additional
Sure.
funding. With that. It's simply
We have
for
an
ECS.
infographic that's posted on our website. We would be happy to share it with you.
Fantastic. We appreciate that. Senator, you all set, Senator?
No, I'd be happy to share the per pupil amount of the districts that I have broken down with everybody also.
Sounds good. Representative Weedlander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to everyone for this this really helpful presentation. And I would like to impose by asking for more information, specifically if it would be possible to get a look back for the last 5 years on the special education populations across the state and how they have changed from maybe fiscal year 19 to moving forward to 23, 24.
Sorry. Let me just qualify or clarify. Are you asking for the number of students or are you asking for excess cost expenditures or both?
Both would be, I mean,
Okay, great.
Since you offered, thank you. That would be great, just so we can get an idea of the total cost that and how each district is having to use their foundation grant and then moving forward. So that would be wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And we'll move on. We have Representative Carney and then Representative Exum, and then we'll move on to our next panel. Representative Carney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. So I just have a question regarding the free and reduced lunch number. I guess number one, how is that data sent to the state? And number two, there are proposals to give everyone a free lunch. So how then would that formula change? Through you, Mr. Chairman.
So the free lunch counts used for ECS come from the student data. Each October, every district, possibly town, I can't remember, submits student level data. So each student literally has a row and it tells if that student is an English language learner, if they're receiving free or reduced price lunch, and if so, which of them the student is receiving. It lists all the schools the student is attending, their resident town. So the free and reduced price lunch data for ECS come from that data that's submitted in October. There has been discussion in the past, and I'm assuming it will continue in the future, about whether that should continue to be the free and reduced price lunch, or whether free and reduced price lunch counts should continue to be used, or if some variation should be used, because many districts and schools are using the community eligibility provision program to offer free lunches to their entire student bodies. And so that makes the counting trickier. So I'm anticipating there will be discussion about that.
Okay, thank you very much.
And last but not least, our friend from West Hartford, Representative Exum.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for this very informative presentation. I just have a question about specialized schools that I don't know exactly where they fit, like therapeutic schools that students are sometimes sent to. Where would that fit? And how does that funding piece work or break down?
I'm not entirely sure. Can we get back to you on that? Thank you.
Absolutely.
And I think you're speaking specifically
Mary
to
Beth might want to add
outplacement.
in something, or John.
Can I ask,
John.
are you thinking of private special ed providers that, okay, that, yes. So
Yeah,
they're a
yeah.
separate category of schools that we did not address today, and that's when a school district decides, usually through the IEP process, that a student needs outplacement and maybe they go to this specialized school to take care of whatever that student's needs are. So we can get you information on how many of them there are. The state actually approves them. They go through a process.
And
That-
then
that would
the
be great.
towns have to pay the costs.
Right. So I was just curious about how that looks. So thank you so much. If you could
Okay.
provide some of that information. Thank you.
All right, again, truly appreciate the time you all took. I know you're extremely busy with all of the proposed bills and others that you're working on for us. So we appreciate the time that you've taken today. Any additional questions folks have, feel free to send those over to Rosalie, the Clerk of Education. We can get those over to the nonpartisan and provide answers. Also provide the slide deck that they used today for their presentation. So thank you very much. Next up, we're going to bring up school district and program leaders. We have Superintendent Lucero, Superintendent Quinnell, Kay Erickson, Dr. Reed, and Chris Leone. You sit right up at the seats. Yes. So if you like, two of you can go there, two of you can go there. We can pull up an extra seat if Rosalie has one next to the mics. So good afternoon. Appreciate you all being here today to share your perspective on education funding and how that's impacting your districts and some of the challenges that you all may face given our current structure and kind of looking ahead at what we might be able to do moving forward. I will kick this off. I'm going to show preferential treatment with my very own superintendent in East Hartford, Superintendent Quinnell, if you'd like to kick us off. Is your mic on, Superintendent? Hit that button. There you go.
That may be the first time I've ever needed a microphone, so. Yeah, so starting from the top, thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this this issue, and also thank you for the presentation I was able to sit through in the back regarding school funding. I've been a superintendent in East Hartford for 11 years, and you know, the complexity of school funding is a challenge that is not one for the weak of knees. So I give you a lot of credit as a committee for working on this. You know, I'm here to really talk today about obviously a proposal sitting in front of you, HB 5003, and obviously the impact that has on a district like East Hartford, but certainly districts across the state, from southeastern Connecticut across the river, obviously all the way to my hometown in the northwest corner of Torrington. And, you know, when we think about this opportunity and what's sitting in front of you today, an opportunity to talk about equity in a real way, in a tangible way, in a way that makes a difference beyond a conversation, an opportunity to talk about excellence, and I've talked about lifting children up. This is that moment, and this is that time. So for us specifically, when we talk about this and think about the complexity of school finance, East Hartford is situated certainly in the midst of that, but every district has its unique positional components when it comes to school finance. And at the end of the day, we all share that vision, is we want our kids to thrive and succeed, and we realize that it takes resources for that to happen. And so, yeah, so for us, I think it starts with number one, the disconnect in our current formula between student need and ultimately the state's impact and funding of that need. So when you take a place like East Hartford ranks in unfortunately the bottom 10 of any distressed municipality. Any list you look at is an extremely poor town, a stagnant grand list, a town that struggles with generating wealth for that property tax component, et cetera. And it's also a town that struggles with student achievement. It's a town that struggles with meeting the needs of a rapidly growing special education population. We're over 22% of our students identified as special needs students, and growing in multiple digit rates per year. Our number of students with EL identified as EL learners are growing, also our fastest growing population. And these are kids that, when we provide the resources, programs, supports, teachers, technologies, these are kids that can thrive, and these are families that can thrive and take root into our great state. But when you look at that and you think about what that is, East Hartford is one of the cities in our state that represents incredible need, but also represents incredible depravity when it comes to funding. We're the fourth lowest district in the state in terms of per pupil expenditure. And that just on any indicator just doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think it's easy for anyone to look at that and say, yeah, that's definitely what I believe in. I had an opportunity to participate a few years ago in the Supreme Court case, the CJF case, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I learned there in that process that constitutionally Connecticut is responsible for providing a minimally adequate public education. Can't tell you that's what wakes me up every day with inspiration, is that's what I'm here to do. And that's why when conversations like this, I'm really excited about what that is. So this mismatch in our current formula is something that gives you a chance to address. I think the second thing for us is this disentanglement of sped tuition, of magnet tuitions, excuse me, in the local budget and the state process. Obviously, we sit in the Chef region, and the Chef region going to a magnet school in East Hartford, it might be a shorter bus ride than it is to go to our own middle school. We have a very large population of students going to magnet schools. Almost 1,100 students in East Hartford go to magnet schools. That's a tune of over $6 million a year that goes out the door in tuitions going out to schools. Very difficult bill for us to pay, very challenging bill for us to pay as I send money out, but then contemplate cutting services in. That's not what families sign up for when they move into our communities. They don't want to know that they're not going to have those opportunities that kids who choose to leave our district. That wasn't what choice and integration were about. That's about segregation, and that's about furthering the homogeneity of the community of poor and challenged. And that certainly wasn't the vision, certainly wasn't the intent, and there's an opportunity to fix it. So for us, over the years, we've worked on several legislative fixes of things to do it. I would call them Band-Aids to a degree, and that doesn't mean to be disrespectful to it. Our community is grateful that this is a chance to right set that and disentangle magnet schools from public school funding. The last piece, I think, is really honestly the most serious, the most pressing thing I'm sure facing your community, though, is the opportunity HB 005003 gives us in terms of addressing the fiscal cliff of fiscal year 25. And I'm sure that, that phrase to me is an overused phrase right now, but that's a real phrase. So in the over $1 billion that have been invested in Connecticut schools and COVID relief, ARP and ESSER funds, I'm sure you're familiar with it. I'm sure your community is familiar with that. Over $480 million of those funds are in personnel costs. So that means that your school systems, my school system for sure, my school system has $3 million invested in this, are employing people that in fiscal year 25, that grant sunsets. So the reality we're facing is looking at that is what will a school budget like mine do? Either engage in pushing a town for a significant mill rate increase in a town that has a very high mill rate and inability to raise taxes, or reducing force and creating layoffs. So that's a serious moment that your district is facing, that my district is facing, and that is a great opportunity to talk like this in front of you and encourage you to look at this moment as a moment to make a dramatic change in what Connecticut stands for in terms of ed policy, in terms of ed funding, and in terms of ed expectations. So I am really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, Representative Curry, for inviting me here, and really pleased to answer questions, et cetera.
Thank you, Superintendent. Dr. Lucero, nice to see you.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me here today. And I see some of my representatives in the room, so I appreciate. I'm Dr. Temu Lucero. I'm the superintendent in Stamford. I've been with the Stamford Public Schools for the last decade, and I have been the superintendent for about 4 years. And I'm going to really just focus on House Bill 5003 because it really is going to have a major impact on Stamford. And I think that I can describe it really well because it's really interesting. When I was driving here today, I always tell people I don't really leave Stamford. I spend most of my time just driving around the town. And for most people here in Hartford, you might think of a town like Stamford. We border Greenwich and Darien, and I think we're known as the Gold Coast down there. And in reality, we have lots of students in Stamford who have lots of needs. And so we think that our town does a really nice job job of supporting our local schools, but they can't do it all. And so any support that we've gotten through our alliance funds, we've really tried to create programs that are very meaningful for our students. And that's what we did when we got our ESSER funds. Now, originally people talked about us using them for one-time things, but we knew that our students needed more than that, right? They needed support of additional social workers and really basic things like security guards for our elementary schools. We've never had those before, and we really felt like we came to a time period that we could not ignore that in our neighboring school district. That's just something that was part of doing business in education right now. So we really did try to add things like kindergarten paras. Shouldn't every student have a kindergarten para when you have struggles, when some of your students come in and they're not reading at grade level, and you have students who come into your school district that first language is not English? These are basic things that we spent our ESSER dollars on, and now they're going away. And I'm going to have to make a really hard decision in a few days. In about a year, to figure out what we're going to do about this. But I'm asking you all to understand the situation we're in as superintendents, as leaders of charter schools, private schools, wherever we're educators right now. We need your help in helping us figure out how we're going to get over this fiscal cliff that everyone's telling us we're on. But we got here for a good reason, right? We were given all of this technology. We went home overnight and we were able to really work through the COVID times. But now it's time for us to stand up for our children and say, this is the right thing to do right now. And we can't wait. After this year, it becomes that all of those positions go away and they're really hard to bring back. So anything that you can do at this time, I want to invite you all to Stanford, because I think we represent really what we are around the state of Connecticut. So I'm in buildings every morning. So if anyone wants to take the drive down to Stanford and walk around the buildings and see the wonderful things that we're doing, but also realizing that without the support of this bill, it's not going to be in place anymore.
Thank you very much. And, I know a number of members always find it concerning when we hear about the positions that are brought on through the ESSER funds that likely should have just always been there to begin with. And that the districts just simply do not have the resources for. And as Superintendent Quinnell mentioned, that towns don't often have the ability to pay for. So we appreciate you highlighting that. Next, we're going to go over to Dr. Charlene Reed.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. I gotta scoot up a little bit. Good afternoon. I'm the founder for Stanford Charter School for Excellence. And just as my colleagues have said, and Dr. Lucero, we're both in Stanford. When I tell people there's a school, a charter school in Stanford, they're like, oh, there's a charter school. It's a, because of the idea of it being the Gold Coast. And I have students who have high needs in our schools. And as the presentation before presented, we just get the foundation rate. And I chuckled at the little money bag in the corner. I was like, where's that money bag come from? Because I don't see it in our schools. But House Bill 5003 would definitely, I can't say it enough, with a per pupil rate of $11,525 to educate Stanford Excellence students. We could definitely use the increase. There are some estimations out there that there could be an increase to receive almost an extra $2,000 per pupil. That makes a huge difference, as our colleagues know. $2,000 per pupil can help pay for more teachers, can pay for tutors, programming, and what's more important now than ever before, mental health supports for our scholars. We've been able to use some of our COVID dollars to help with some of those positions, but we know, as has been shared before, that with this fiscal cliff, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And so that's the perspective from the charter school.
No, we appreciate that, Dr. Reed. And again, it's very important to note and say this as often as we possibly can, that charter schools are public schools. You are educating our children. And so to have you as part of this conversation, I think is very important. So we appreciate that perspective. Next, we'll go over to Kate Erickson, the Executive Director of Learn. Good afternoon, Kate.
Good afternoon, Representative Curry and Senator McCrory and everyone here. Thank you for making time for us today and to have this robust conversation about educational funding. I'm going to have to admit, I learned some things today. There were some things I didn't realize that just what wasn't in my lexicon of knowledge. So I appreciate this education myself. Regional Educational Service Centers, or RESCs, are nonprofits, fee-for-service public education agencies. The mission of RESC is to provide high quality, cost-effective educational resources, programs, and services to the state's public schools. We were created by state statute, are governed by representatives of local Board of Educations, and dedicated to helping schools improve teaching, learning, and student achievement. Learn in Southeastern Connecticut operates 4 magnet schools. Our first magnet school was Regional Multicultural Magnet School. It was over 30 years old. It is the first elementary interdistrict magnet school in the nation. So it has a rich history, and it was created by the superintendents in our region for a need for multicultural education. So it's been a wonderful experiment. Magnet schools are the single largest form of school choice, innovative and open to all students within Connecticut, regardless of zip code. Since the early 1970s, the effort to desegregate schools in the US has been fostered in part by the development of magnet schools. Through magnet schools, students can access programs with inclusive environments that are racially, culturally, linguistically, and socioeconomically diverse environments, and they're able to access curriculum and instruction that's culturally responsive. By not only providing, but supporting parental choice here in Connecticut, we support voluntary desegregation, which we know leads to stronger outcomes for all students. The difficulty with school choice and voluntary desegregation strategies is that Connecticut has never fully funded a formula that equitably distributes state aid for education to towns and districts until now, with the proposal of HB 5003. HB 5003 invests in student futures by reducing economic and racial funding disparities and helping to bridge the fiscal gaps that will be left when COVID relief dollars expire. Yes, we all have been talking about COVID relief dollars expiring, but no, the needs of our students have not expired. I actually had the displeasure of starting my admin career in 2010 when the ARA funds were reduced and I was in an alliance district. That first week of my job, I had to cut 52 positions because of the end of federal funding. So I know what this feels like. I know what it looks to cut art. I know what it looks like to make a teacher who's certified in 2 things do something they don't want to do, because that's what you do when you have to cut $2 million out of your budget. It's a very, very painful process. Every day, educators see 3- and 4-year-old children who were isolated during the pandemic. Some of these children had never even been in a store. We see middle school age and high school age students with higher rates of violence. Unfortunately, this week, every time you turn the TV on, there's another incident of violence happening in our schools. Students who watched loved ones struggled with health complications during the pandemic, and many of them who lost loved ones during the pandemic and are trying to make their way back to normalcy. HB 5003 protects and supports all of these students, every student, students in local public schools, choice schools, charter schools, agri-science programs. It doesn't matter where a student goes to school. This bill supports all students. It concerns me to state that Learn Magnet schools are running in a deficit. Our board and our leadership team have had to make a choice. We could increase tuition charges to the local districts to cover our costs. And if we do that, we just add to the problem and not to the solution. If we increase tuition, we burden an already tasked education system. Another choice we have is close our schools and remove those elements for the 1,400 students that attend our 4 schools. Or we can help create a sustainable future for all students, not just our own. This student-centered proposal, fully funded, will help create a sustainable future by expediting the phase-in of the ECS formula, which equitably distributes aid on the individual needs of students. That's a first, actually funding what kids need. Pretty impressive. We know that a high quality, solid educational foundation for students benefits society as a whole, as education supports the workforce directly. We also know that 67% of Connecticut public school students do not receive the full education funding to which they are entitled. And more than 10 different formulas, as we saw today, are currently used to fund public education in Connecticut. Student resources and opportunities are frequently limited based on two factors: where a student lives and the type of public school they attend. We have the power to change that today. We can now fully fund education based on the individual needs of the student. HB 5003 proposal would also eliminate the billing of tuition. And for a regional educational service center, it doesn't feel good to be serving your districts and then serving them a bill at the same time. So that would really be very much appreciated if we could end that. Today, I speak in favor of fully funding the HB 5003, an act concerning education funding in Connecticut. And what I find refreshing and exciting about HB 5003, it's a bill that considers all of public education. This bill is about all students, regardless of their public school choice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Appreciate the perspective. Next up, we'll move up to Superintendent Leone. And if folks have questions online, feel free to raise your hand, or in the room, just signal over to Rep. Lieber.
Good afternoon, Representative Curry, Senator McCrory. Christopher Leone, Superintendent of Regional School District Number 6 in Litchfield Public Schools, and also in the progress of creating Regional School District Number 20, the first new regional school district in the state of Connecticut in over 40 years. As I sit here today, and I see a familiar face in Senator McCrory, there was a comment made earlier by Representative Curry. How did we get here? And I applaud you all for actually having the time to educate yourselves on how we got here. But in 2005, I wasn't a superintendent. I was an assistant principal at a Hartford magnet school. That's when I actually first met Senator McCrory. And these conversations were being held back then. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey back then to how we got to today and why this is so important. A student from a neighboring district receives their ECS. We'll call it $10,000. Hasn't moved that much in that time. They get on a bus and somebody gets paid for that transportation. Call that $3,000. They go to ascending magnet school, no tuition. We'll call it $13,000. $26,000 of state aid behind that child. You heard today, districts paying tuition, charter schools at $11,000. This has been perpetuated over time. So why does it matter? Why is a rural superintendent from the northwest corner here? Well, I've been living this for 18 years. Many of you have. But it also, in this bill, applies to everybody. Technical schools, charters, magnet schools. I'm proud to say I am the superintendent who was sued personally and professionally 6 years ago for accepting ag students off a waiting list when a district held them up. Wasn't about tuition at that point. It was about access. The same argument we made for our students in Chef when I was in Hartford is the same argument this bill makes for everybody. It provides access and equitable funding. I applaud you all. I applaud all the signatures currently on the bill, because where we are today is further than we've ever been before. And we're at a time where we can't let that opportunity pass. Somebody once asked me, why did I take those students? Knew I was going to get in trouble, got warned. Because they had one shot at high school. One shot to attend arguably one of the best ag programs in our country. Same reason that we go above and beyond as educators during a pandemic to have in-person learning, provide mental health supports. And yes, to hear from a colleague that they're running in deficit and still doing it. Now is your opportunity. Now is your opportunity to address this, to move forward, and provide that fairness across our entire state that impacts over 500,000 students. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just so members know, if you have not already seen the notice, this Friday, we will be having a joint public hearing specifically on House Bill 5003. So as our panelists are making comments today, keep that in mind as you're going to be listening again on Friday, and hopefully we'll have additional questions at that point. Rep. Felipe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all 5 of you for being here, joining us and really expressing from, your standpoint in your districts, what we need to do and why this is so critical, that we get this bill done. But if you guys don't mind, I have a quick comment before my question. Dr. Reed, I want to express our sincerest condolences. I know we lost a colleague, but so did you, and Representative Williams. He was somebody who helped lead your school to be one of the best in our state. And we thank you for being here. I know it's tough to not be here alongside him, as we have been alongside him for many years. So our deepest condolences on his passing. But my question is this, and it's pretty simple, and please guys try to be brief. I don't want to be the reason some of my colleagues don't get home for dinner in time. But just some specific examples of how you've used federal funding on the last couple of years to supplement what you've been doing, and how we can keep that going with 5003. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We're public school superintendents, so brief is not something we're familiar with, but do my best, So when obviously the COVID relief money came, Dr. Lucero talked about this initiative and concept of trying to hit one-time costs. And that was certainly something we all knew. Obviously, when you have limited funding, you're gonna hit a window where it's not going to be there. So for us, large portions of this monies, we were looking almost $30 million were invested in technology improvements. We were a district who had a 5-year vision and dream before COVID hit to be a 1-to-1 district, which many of obviously our affluent districts at the time were already there. We were when we went home, we were having kids share iPhones to do online learning. But within 3 months, using the first round of CRF funding at the time is what it was called, we were able to get to 1-to-1. We invested all of that money, with the exception of just over $3 million to the facility projects, IAQ projects that over the next 30 years are going to make a difference for East Hartford community. The dollars I'm worried about, and I'm proud of that investment, I'm proud of the long-term thinking around that. The money I'm worried about is this $3.045 million that is invested in salaries. It's one of those signature initiatives of us. We call them acceleration specialists. We had kids who were home for 2 years, certainly on iPads and on laptops, working with families as they navigated COVID, fears of COVID, et cetera. And we needed to get those kids up to speed. In East Hartford, we've been a place where we said, we're not going to talk about what we've lost. We're going to talk about how quickly we're going to gain here. And so across all of our elementary schools, we hired what we called acceleration specialists. These are highly trained, certified teachers who are able to work with kids who should demonstrated learning gaps, address those gaps, identify those gaps, and then supplement those gaps towards improvement. I'm really proud of what's happened there. We are one of the districts showed the least amount of learning loss as compared to the 2018 scores. And some folks, there's been conversations in town, so that's great, we solved that problem. We're so far from solving that problem. This is an initiative that has come in place, that has worked, and that we want to keep moving. But certainly across these schools, these acceleration specialists, there is no home for them in our local budget. And these are positions that ultimately will be reduced in fiscal year 25. So there's a good example of positions that have been there.
And I'll just jump in and just say that we spent about half of our dollars on capital projects that we really felt needed to be done. Roofing projects, anything that was, I think you all heard about all the huge mold issue we had in Sanford. We really worked hard to deal with our water intrusion issues. And so some of our preventative maintenance things that kept that going is things that we focused on. But our big thing, as Nate described, are those resources that we put in. We used to have parent facilitators that were only part-time, and our parent facilitators really are the gateway to our families. They do home visits for us. They take the opportunity to provide support to families who don't know how to navigate our school system. So now across all 23 of our sites, we have a parent facilitator that works with our families, and that they really focus on chronic absence absenteeism to make sure that if students aren't coming to school, we figure out quickly why they're not coming to school. One of the programs that I'm most proud of that we created during this time period, I know everyone understands the 211 system. If a student's having an issue in our schools, acting out with their behavior, having some mental health challenges, people come in and help support that. The 211 system is stressed at this time, and so we decided to build an internal 211 system. We still use the external system, but it allows for us, for those students who are having the issues on a regular basis, that they have a familiar face that's coming back, because often with 211, different people come every time to help out our staff. So that's a program that we implemented that will not be in place if we will not have the funding for it if these funds go away. And I'll focus on one more, which is school security. We have worked really hard to make our families feel safe in our schools. And when you look to the left of us and look to the right of us, and they're able to afford to have security in their school districts, and we're not able to. We went for a long time without any security in our elementary schools. We now have that. You see a marked difference when you walk into a building and people feel comfortable that someone's walking around and making sure they're safe. And so those positions will go away if we don't get this additional funding. So I could go on. I have a whole list here of $8 million worth of positions, over 100 positions, but I think you get the sense of what the need is.
I think many of the districts' answers are going to be the same across the state. One of the things we were most proud of is we provided summer programming, knowing that we had students who needed remediation, and we also had students that needed enrichment. So we did 4 weeks of extended summer programming at no cost to any of our families. That was probably the one thing I would say really made a difference when we look at how we performed coming out of the pandemic. We didn't see that slide that many saw, so that was a positive.
And again, ditto to a lot of the programs that they've talked about, but we also built a learning and behavior team. So a team of a school psych, board certified behavior analyst, as well as a special educator and another social worker. And the idea was this is a poor term, but like a SWAT team to really support that child holistically, rather than just looking at data and a number and how's their math score, but saying, what does this child need? What are the skill sets that we can put around this child to make sure we put a plan together for them to be successful? We added more social workers as well. We saw things like in a school of 500 pre-Ks, 120 kids weren't potty trained. That's hard to really focus on education when you're worrying about whether the diapers are clean. So there's just a lot of intense needs that we're going to get over in terms of this hill, but it was a large hill to climb.
All set, Representative?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add, because I do appreciate your answers and how you talked about using them for one-time costs, but I know in Bridgeport specifically, we have our superintendent who has been using it for special ed costs, right? And to make sure that we have more folks in the classroom that can deal with those students. So there are a lot of reasons as to why we've needed this funding for a long time. But people are using some of these funds now to bridge that gap, and we need to make sure that keeps going. And when we hit that cliff, we don't fall off of it. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Delaney.
Thank you. I won't take up too much time, and I would like to echo the comments of my good colleague, and to thank you all for being here today, particularly Dr. Lucero, Dr. Reed, coming up from my home city of Stamford. And to Dr. Reed, I just wanted to publicly congratulate you on the good work that you've done at your school, receiving national attention for the school that our colleague who passed away, who served so bravely in. So thank you for everything that you've done, and thank you for being here and for the bravery to testify in service to our schools.
Thank you, Representative. And I know the ranking House member, Representative McCarty, is having issues with her audio, but she did want to express her gratitude for you all being here today and providing additional information and perspectives. And I think for members, I think the overarching theme that we're hearing is that, you know, due to the pandemic, a large tranche of money was invested into our respective communities, and we're able to provide supports that likely should have always been there to begin with. And that if we don't have a very serious conversation right now, that we're looking to go backwards. And that is the last thing that we need to do when we know that we have some of the lowest performing districts, not only in the state, but in the country, right in our backyards. And so we have some serious decisions and things that we need to discuss here in the legislature and moves that hopefully we will make. So again, really appreciate your perspectives today. Next up, we're going to move to our school level perspectives with Kate Diaz from CEA and Todd Dyer, school counselor from Avon. Leonard. Good afternoon. Dealer's choice. You each have one of your own.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. So happy to be here in support of this bill. My name is Todd Dyer. I'm the Director of School Counseling at Avon High School and Avon Public Schools. I'm also a member of the Board of Directors for the Connecticut School Counseling Association, educator for almost 30 years, a longtime swim coach, and a collaborator with the State Department of Education as one of the lead authors on the most recent school counseling framework that was published in 2020 and now serves as the Connecticut current comprehensive model for school counseling in Connecticut. The new paradigm of school counseling is one of advocacy, leadership, and equity. It's built around the three domains: social, emotional, academic, career, and college, with the goal to provide academic achievement and success for all students. Reason I bring that up is because as school counselors, especially the last few years, along with the other educators in the state, we have been at the front line of meeting students' needs and have seen significant increases in those needs. And over my almost 30-year career, the last few years have been the most challenging for sure. School counselors provide a proactive range of services. So we are really that front line, from in-class lessons to small group sessions, individual counseling, school-wide programming. And we serve as a hub of information that many families and students access to meet with success in their schools. Through our work, we also offer tiered intervention. And I think that has pushed school counselors around the state of Connecticut the last few years in ways that have really made them be creative to meet student needs and families' needs in the face of these recent challenges. We are, as school counselors, are usually the first go-to for families, and they reach out to us when they don't know who to turn to. So we really are at the front line. We're advocates who are leaders in our schools. We identify barriers to educational access and working tirelessly to remove those hurdles. And again, as we've seen these challenges come forward over the last few years, there's been a need for more support. And I think we just heard from many people speak about this need for the continued support that many schools have responded to. What that's looked like in a lot of schools, including mine, is that we've added additional school counselors and other support staff. It's concerning to think about what that would look like if those personnel were to lose their positions and those supports were to be removed because of the funding issues. In Avon, our school board of ed made the decision to make that position that we added permanent, so that school counselor will continue on. But it was something that, as the director of school counseling and the comprehensive program, something I thought about quite a bit. And it was a big worry because we were able to really help our students and families with that additional staffing. And I think that's a concern as we look around the state. And from my lens as board director in SISCA, it's definitely something that I hear from other schools and school counselors around the state of Connecticut, the need for that additional personnel. School counselors serve as the nexus around a lot of those services and well positioned within the schools to work with administration, social workers, school psychologists, teachers, interventionists, and the whole cadre of people that work to support students and families, both in school and out. With additional funding that has been available, I think many schools, and I don't know the exact number, but I know many schools that we've already heard have added that personnel. And I think, it also has allowed schools to really embrace that new comprehensive framework that was put in place in 2020 and put in pieces, if not fully realize that framework at their school settings to provide those services for students and families. And I'll just reiterate that level of student concern, that major increase in need for mental health services that we have seen day to day, both at my school and around the state. And we are still seeing that effect, even though things have returned to normal in many ways. I use that in quotes. The students are seeing that lasting impact. We see it on a day-to-day basis. Working with kids to try and navigate all those challenges they've had, trying to get back to that normal setting, that in-school setting, and get rid of some of those habits that, coming to school, for one of them, attending. It's hard to predict how long that effect is going to be on students in schools, but it's clear that the more mental health services that we can offer in our schools, the better our students will be. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And Kate, nice to see you. And I'm hoping you'll be able to provide a perspective of what the last couple of years have meant to educators around the state, and some of the challenges that you have seen and the challenges that we will see moving forward.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss not to mention that I do feel as a classroom teacher, like this is the lunch wave after block scheduling, right? Like at the very end where everyone's like, oh, okay, what else are you going to do? Like, we just want to have a sandwich. So I really, truly appreciate all of you kind of hanging in there for the important work that we're talking about here today. I taught during the pandemic. My background is from Manchester, so I come from an alliance district. I have the privilege of having gone through sort of all the waves and the evolutions of what education has looked like in Manchester. I have had classrooms of 30 and have had to be challenged by the fact that I couldn't physically meet the needs of my students because I couldn't actually reach them because we jam-packed them in the classroom. We have evolved our district over time to be able to drive down class sizes, but the needs are increasing of our student population. And I think we see that really clearly in all of the sort of pandemic fallout, if you will, the idea that we can see these social emotional needs so vividly and that our children really kind of wear them on their sleeve and ask every single person they come in contact with to help them. And so it's really an interesting time to be an educator. When I started 20 years ago, so much of the work that we did, we'd find a child who was struggling and we'd hand them off to wonderful people like Todd. And we'd say, well, let us know what we can do to be supportive. And we would generate sort of plans. And it was a little bit tidier of a process, I think. Now what we've seen is the evolution and the complexity of the needs of our children. It requires everybody to have all hands on deck. And we are finding that they're getting better, thankfully, at expressing their needs, but that requires a response. And so we have to do the things that are going to support our education systems to be the foundation of really strong, vibrant communities. And I think the vision we kind of all share is that we will have communities where children can thrive and grow and families want to be there and people want to move into the state of Connecticut. It's this very exciting aspirational effort that we're undertaking, but it's expensive, people. You cannot do it on the cheap and then go, why didn't it work? At the end of the day, we have to recognize that the investment we're talking about today, when we talk about raising teacher salaries, and I would be remiss not to mention that if that's not a core value, as we move forward, we're doing it wrong because we are driving people out of this profession because they cannot financially afford to teach children. That is a crime.
That is absolutely not the direction and value that we as a state should undertake. We should be directly talking about driving class size down, because if I, as an educator, have a smaller class size, I have the capability of really meeting those children where they need, identify how I can support them, and draw in the beautiful people that I have as support workers and counselors, that we can all work together as a more cohesive team and structure. That takes money, folks. And we would be remiss if we didn't talk about sort of the brass tacks of that. So we have to look at the investment in our education system as an investment in our socioeconomic well-being, and we have to talk about it from a real perspective. And I totally respect what Senator Summers was talking about, that we have to expand that thought process to include financially distressed communities. You know, we give a lot of love to my alliance districts in terms of attention and talking about it, but we have need that is widespread across the state of Connecticut. And when I put my hat on as the Connecticut Education Association president, I'm afforded the ability to talk to my friends in Thompson, where we have a one school district that has a real struggle of retaining staff because they can't keep wages competitive. It's interesting that it's the same problem that Bridgeport's having, but the experience of those educators is a hair different. The communities they're serving is delicately balanced and very different and nuanced. And I think the best thing we can do is talk about how we balance those needs, provide for our children, and allow community voice in that process to ensure that our schools reflect our values as a society and as a community. And I think that we have to recognize that resource allocation matters. When I was a kid, my parents said, listen, Kate, here's how we're going to know what your values are. And they were real clear. My parents were very clear about everything. But this particular, they said, open your checkbook. Those are your values, because where you spend your money is where you're willing to allocate your resources. And I believe that if we look at our checkbook in the state of Connecticut, we have a little bit more we should be doing for education. And we have a little bit more that we could be allocating and driving towards our values as a community of, I mean, it's soul crushing to think that we want to be just adequate. I have never in my life thought, hey, you know what I'd like to be? I'd like to be adequate. So I think that perhaps as a mission, we should drive towards a slightly better goal of being exceptional, of being a destination for educators and education, as being really a guiding place where people want to see how education is done well. They look to Connecticut. They want to see the productive outcome of an investment in education. They look at Connecticut. They want to see strong workforce development. They look at Connecticut. We're not there yet. They're looking to our neighbors, people. And I always hate it when they look at New Jersey. All right. So we can do better. And I am very excited about this session. I'm excited about the breadth of things we're going to talk about. And I'm excited that we're not scared to talk about money. And if you ever need any help, I will happily grab my graphing calculator and come on down to anybody's office to talk about impact and investing, because this is a near and dear topic to my heart, and it is my life's mission to make math make sense. So if there's any of you who need assistance, I'm more than happy to do that. And I thank you for the opportunity and the privilege of being here today to address you, and would look forward to an exciting, vibrant session where we do big things for the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Kate. And yes, one of our colleagues, Representative McCarthy-Vahey, would agree with you. She always says it all comes down to math. So I'm sure she's at home listening and clapping along. I appreciate you also mentioning, the rural versus urban. Everybody is kind of dealing with all of the same issues and problems, and especially with the teacher shortage. I know that the good senator and our members of education and others are going to be discussing and hopefully working on. But that pay discrepancy that we see, and districts imparting their wisdom for a year or two only to have that person stolen and sent over somewhere else that's in a neighboring town making $30,000, $40,000 more. There's a problem with that. And if we're not going to pay adequately, the level of stress that teachers are under is directly going to impact that pipeline, and why that may be drying up. Because again, why would a student want to have Mrs. Brown in class during the day and then see Mrs. Brown possibly serving them pizza at Uno's just to be able to make ends meet? So I think we need to be doing better by our educators. And that's when we say educators, I mean teachers, paraprofessionals, everybody on down that's providing that support within those districts. So we appreciate your perspective on that as well. Any questions from members here in the room? Doesn't look like it. I don't see any hands up online. So I will once again say thank you to you both for offering up your school district perspectives to us today. Next up, we have Board of Ed member Leonard Lockhart from the Windsor Board of Education. And then we'll end our day with Dave Smith from Stanley Black & Decker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everyone on the Appropriations and Education Committee. My name is Leonard Lockhart. I represent CABE as first vice president, and I also serve on the Windsor Board of Education as vice president. Before I even start, I just want to say thank you. Too often we come to you with our problems and issues, and at times we don't thank you for what you have actually done for us. It may not be what we want, but it's something. So I'm hoping that this conversation is a conversation that's going to push us to a higher trajectory of where we need to be. I know for a fact you listen to the loud majorities as well as the loud minorities, but I want us to reflect on the most faintest voice within the state of Connecticut. That one child that may be living in a situation that cannot control their zip code, but at the same time deserve to have the same type of education as everyone else in the state of Connecticut. That is what we face as Board of Education members on a daily basis. We are held directly accountable to our electorate in regards to the performance of our school districts. We have the same constitutional authority as you. We are elected through the authority of our state constitution, and we're held accountable by our electorate. But we only supervise one person, and that is the superintendent. So the superintendents that have came and spoke before me, I stand in unison with them on their stances of exactly the problems and faces that they face. The problems that we face as Board of Education members is that now we have to take that plan, convert it to a fiscal plan, and then sell it to our electorate, no matter how your town charter is set up. In Windsor, we go through a process where it goes to our town council, and then once it's passed by the town council, it goes to referendum. That's not the same in the rural, urban, and suburban environment. But at the same time, we're all advocating for the same pot of money. Yes, I'm very partial to Windsor because I live in Windsor. That's why I was elected. But per my oath, I'm responsible for every single child in the state of Connecticut. That's why I'm here on behalf of CABE. So we're looking to make sure that we avoid the fiscal cliff that we all know is coming. We've all had an opportunity to enjoy some funding that we quite frankly have needed for years. And now we're actually putting programs in place, especially in areas of supports of social emotional learning, interventionists, special education, building out summer programs, building out infrastructure to provide more supports, guidance counselors. We need to really take a serious look about what are our priorities. Our children are our most precious resource. And if you look at our budget, we don't fully fund education the way it should be. Should there be accountability for those funds? Absolutely. I believe every single Board of Education member will agree with that. I don't think that this is a partisan issue at all. I think this is a citizen of the state of Connecticut issue. And I think we all want what's best for our children. We're not going to speak about loss because we don't look at it from that negative perspective. We're coming from a perspective as Board of Ed members of the gains we've made. And do we, now that the fiscal cliff is coming, do we absorb these programs within our budgets and push it upon our taxpayer, our electorate, to convince them to actually absorb this? Or do we come to the state and ask the state to help us out? The mandate for public education in the state of Connecticut is rooted within our Constitution. So just like us on a local level as Board of Ed members, we have to exude leadership at the local level. We are here standing in unison with you to exude that leadership on a state level. We're not asking you to commit to something that's totally impossible. We understand the state of Connecticut does not have an infinite pot of money. We understand that, but we understand that we have not fully funded education for a very long time. This is not a problem that started overnight, and quite frankly, it's not going to end overnight, but it's going to be a long-term collaborative process where we're all in this together. This is not a problem that we should pass on to the next generation, We need to have the audacity to address it now. We need to have the political courage to address it now. That's what Board of Ed members are looking for from the state of Connecticut, no matter what your political party is. Because at the end of the day, we are all dealing with the same issues. And you're not held responsible to the electorate when it comes to Board of Ed issues. It's the Board of Ed members that are held responsible to the electorate. So we are imploring with you. We wish to work with you as CAVE. I believe the superintendents and everyone that spoke before me spoke very, very eloquently about the fact that this is something that we have an opportunity to do something very great with this legislation. And with that, I am open to any questions, comments, or concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Lockhart, and thank you for your work on Board of Education. As a former board member, I know we have a bunch on Education Committee, which we should always have more of. No shade to municipal leaders. It's one of the toughest jobs in any community, given that you are a function of the state, you are not a function of the municipality.
Yep.
And your roles and responsibilities as a Board of Education member. And so we appreciate you being here today to speak on behalf of those around the state, and understanding how those conversations will be quite different over the next year or two, depending on how we as a legislature decide to act when it comes to providing additional resources and funding to districts in need. So thank you.
On behalf of all the Board of Ed members, we thank you for that.
Representative Leeper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Lockhart, thank you for being here. I just want to take one extra moment. Thanks for all you do to serve our state in your role as a CABE representative and vice president, and also just put in a note in the municipal funding that will be required will also be required for our indoor air quality improvements. And you've been serving as a member on that working group, and I've been really grateful for your perspective and insight. So thank you again for your service.
Thank you, ma'am.
Senator McCrory.
Yeah, I just want to say again, it's always a pleasure to hear you, Leonard, speak on behalf of children and the work you guys do on the Board of Education. Continue the great work you're doing, and looking forward to a successful session.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. Be well again. Thank you for all you do.
All right. And last up today, we have Dave Smith from Stanley Black & Decker. We thought it would be a good idea to invite in folks to discuss kind of the workforce pipeline and how education and what we do and the decisions we make impact that particular pipeline. We know we have a governor and administration who kind of speak more that language rather than education speak. And so with that, we will turn it over to Mr. Smith.
Oh, good afternoon. So I'm the anchor. I'm pulling up anchor. Is that what it is? All right. Well, good afternoon, Representative Curry and Senator McCrory. Pleasure to be here. And to the committee, I was told this is an informational session, so I'll provide some information and perspective. Perspective from two fronts in particular. As a longtime resident of Connecticut and a product of Connecticut public school, that I am. And having worked in several different industries for over 30 years in Connecticut, I think I have a good perspective on the workforce needs that's facing us right now, right? So this morning, I attended a breakfast meeting over at CBIA. We had it was called the Ready CT Employee Community Partner Breakfast. And that's where companies were coming together to figure out how we can, from these pathway schools that they're supporting, connect internships. It was an internship breakfast. Like, how do we tie off and get these young high school students into internships? So that was just to underscore that there is a very healthy effort afoot with business and with the education system. And we're trying to make that connection from a workforce standpoint. This conversation, though, is talking about, and I'm so glad that I was last because I got to hear everything before. So I don't have all the data. I have no presentations, but it was really enlightening, especially to hear some of the analysts talk about just how it's funding. I've heard these terms before, but now they have a little more meaning. But I also appreciate some of the passion that I heard articulated, and Kate Diaz, she was on fire, really talking about just why this is so important. And that resonated with me because, you know, we think of Connecticut and we've all heard for years this great disparity between the education, this education gap. Well, it's real. If you look at Connecticut, and everything that I've read says, you know, we're pretty high up there on the most highly educated. We score high state. And then we say, oh, we're really productive. Oh, we score high there too. But where? And is it across all Connecticut? And so I just say, from the standpoint from where I sit, we as industry, and by the way, this morning, Christy Patima talked about, we're still have about 100,000 open positions in Connecticut. Okay? And a good number of those are in manufacturing. And yet we're not filling those gaps. We just keep bouncing that number forward. And it got exacerbated after pandemic, because now that was like 41% more open positions. So it's growing. And so how do we bridge that gap? If we want to be a viable state, an attractive state, not New Jersey, Connecticut, and we want to bring that in, the economics has to make sense. So I just think it's about the math. And so where are we investing funds to create the pipeline that we in industry are looking for? Otherwise, as we think about where someone is going to put a plant or someone is going to do something, and I've worked for several companies where the conversation has been, how expensive is the state? And is there a ready pipeline of workforce or workers that I can pull on to grow so my business thrives? So for all of you, as you think about how to allocate it, and I've heard all of the conversations, and some of it would suggest that there's going to be some jockeying. I got to hold on to what I got. I don't want to lose what I've got. And I don't want to hold on. But if there's a disparity, and there are communities who just at face, at core, are underrepresented, undersupported, underfunded, they don't get above water because everybody just still gets what they had. And then the other thing I think we ought to also consider is there are communities who may not get as much, but they have other things in that community that buoys them up. And it's all about the taxes, right? And so I think about some of these underserved communities where, as companies in Connecticut are looking, how do I tap into that workforce? We're calling on education, particularly K through 12, to prepare them with some of the requisite skills so that they can join us. And we talk about this term I use often is it's not just college ready, but career ready, because we need folks to be able to pivot, to take some of these jobs, very high paying quality jobs in manufacturing, but sometimes they're unaware, or they don't have access to it, or they don't have the basic skills in order to be trained up for that. So those are some of the things that I ask that you know, just think about, because as industry, we're grappling with it, and we're trying to figure out, how do I keep that workforce, that talent pipeline rich? And so we're doing our part to reach into the communities, but we need education to be matching that in a meaningful way. I heard some, I think you Representative Curry, that talked about, we don't want to be competing. It's not a competition. It's about leveling the playing field and making sure all communities are sufficiently funded so that we can prepare students, from my perspective, so that we have the talent pipeline, the workforce that's ready to take on the jobs, that if they get those jobs in those communities, guess what? They start to pay more taxes and they start to fuel the economy, the very thing that all of us really want, that's going to put our state in the best position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we appreciate that perspective from the workforce side of things. And you know, we want to be able to keep that pipeline rich, as you said, and graduating out students who are ready to simply enter into that workforce. I would ask you, if we aren't doing that sufficiently, what kind of decisions are business leaders then making?
Well, and I don't want to speak for any one company, but I would say in general, and even having run a few businesses myself, I just have to think, if I start here, if I continue here, can I grow here? And how will it help me to be competitive? That's the underlying concerns that we all have is can I deliver to my customers? Will I have the employees? And we saw what COVID did to all of that, right? From restaurants to service workers, it just put everything upside down. People just had to close, doors were closing, hours were shortening. And so as we get back to quote unquote, what we want to be normal, we just need to have a solid, reliable, consistent pipeline that produces the workers that can fill the jobs that makes us successful. I think that would I could say that for all businesses, but we see it particularly in manufacturing.
Yeah, and I think Senator McCrory wanted to add a comment, but before, I just want to say I appreciate you talking about the rankings and you know, how some folks come out and, you know, it's cute to say we're the second highest grade public school system in the country, but we know that that's not true when you're stepping into a Fairfield and then you go literally over the line into a Bridgeport, and just the disparities that exist there highlight just how rankings are just not telling that full story. So we appreciate you highlighting that. Senator McCrory.
Thank you. I just want to say that, thank you for coming here and advocating for this, this particular issue. I'm also more inclined to want to find more about the industry and how they want to create an internship program. From the district that I represent, in the district I served as an educator, we had an outstanding, workforce program years ago. Unfortunately, it was let go. And I'm more than interested in collaborating with the industry and this committee to bring something like that back. So I would like to talk to you offline, just to change information so we can get that going. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Any questions for members in the room? No, anyone online? Does not appear so. Thank you. Really appreciate you coming out today.
Thank you.
So that concludes our info forum for today. I just want to thank all the members here in person and those online. As mentioned earlier, this coming Friday, we will have a joint public hearing with Appropriations and Education, specifically on House Bill 5003, that is working to address a number of the needs and concerns that you heard today. So with that, I will wish you all a good afternoon and easy day.